Welcome to Think Diverse, a fresh and deep look at the issues surrounding diversity and inclusion. I'm your host, Catherine De Vries, and I'm a Dean of Diversity and Inclusion at Bocconi University Milan. In every episode, I will pick the brain of one of my Bocconi colleagues about their research about diversity and inclusion. This all to understand how diversity manifests itself in our daily lives, our society, and our economy. In this episode, we're going to talk about disability and how it affects a family. When we think about sickness and disability, we tend to imagine how deeply it can impact a person's life and career. But what we often miss is how it also impacts the life and careers of other members in a sick people's family, especially when the disabled family member is a child. This is where Nicoletta Balbo's research sheds new light. Nicoletta Balbo is an assistant professor at the Bocconi Department of Social and Political Sciences, and she's found strong evidence that sickness is truly a family issue. Nicoletta, thanks for joining us here at Think Diverse.
Hi, great to be here.
So what prompted you to study this important topic?
To be 100% honest, the first and main motor of my interest in families with a disabled member, and more specifically, a disabled child, is my son, Vittorio. Vittorio was born around 7 years ago with a rare genetic syndrome. And this, of course, was a life-changing event for me and for my family. And since then, I started to wonder what is the actual impact of a child disability on the other family members. Which life dimensions are affected the most by this event. And of course, I started to look into the literature and, basically I discovered that evidence is pretty scattered and rather inconclusive. So we know very little about these families, and more in general, they are considered such a sort of rare phenomenon that they tend to be rather invisible, unacknowledged, and of course, marginalized. So by studying these families with a disabled child, what I want to do is to bring them out of their invisibility, and I would like to offer important insights on how they function, what kind of characteristics they have, the challenges that they have to face, but also their strength, with the goal of informing policy that can favor effective social inclusion strategies.
Yeah, so you really talk about how a lot of people with disability, but those family members that, have to deal with the disability of another are kind of marginalized in our research, but maybe also in our social and political discourse. So one of the aspects is also, I think, challenging is how to exactly define disability. So when we talk about disabled persons, who are we talking about exactly?
You're right. Defining disability is indeed very challenging, and exactly because we lack a universal definition and a measurement which has made comparisons between countries and over time problematic, it is also very difficult to have reliable and precise estimates of disability prevalence, of how many disabled people there are. And this is especially problematic with children, because of underdiagnosis and underrepresentation of children in surveys or censuses or administrative data. But going back of how we can define disability, I would say that over the past 4 decades, there has been a sort of a slow shift from a traditional definition of disability as basically illness or abnormality, usually measured using medical impairment, and this impairment can be either physical or mental. We have moved towards a sort of a biosocial approach that see disabilities in light of the social barriers and impediments that individuals with physical, sensory, or intellectual impairments face. this kind of view of disability has found a sort of formal recognition in the definition of the WHO, of the World Health Organization. And WHO defines disability as the result of the interaction between the medical impairment, the ability in activities, and the social environments. To put it simply, there is a person with an impairment, and the way this person experiences limitation in his or her daily activities depends also on the barriers that this person every day face in the environment in which he or she is embedded.
So it's clear that this is an important issue that deals with all of us, because as a society we're also responsible for the kind of impairments or impediments that people with disabilities face. So now your research is not necessarily on the individual that has the disability, but more on how this affects the family of the person. So could you give us a bit of a sense of how a person's disability might affect other members in the family?
Yeah, sure. And the disability of a child or another member of the family affects the other family members in many different ways. Being confronted with the disability of a child, for example, may substantially affect the well-being of the other family members and shape fully their social, demographic, and economic trajectories. These individuals, for example, may experience negative psychological or physiological effects, for example, higher level of anxiety, higher stress, uncertainty about the future, and they end up having fewer resources or time and energy to, for example, pursue employment, and this is very relevant for parents, or education in case of siblings. In general, there is evidence that families with a disabled child show higher level of frailty. For example, parents are more likely to divorce, they on average are poorer, and this is often due to the fact that one parent, usually the mother, stops working because she has to care for the disabled child. Family members are likely to suffer from mental health issues. And this is true, again, for parents, but also for siblings and even for grandparents who, for example, have to bear the double burden of the disability of the grandchild, but also the stress of their child. And also, in general, this higher anxiety and stress can cause, for example, sleep impairment and decreased immune functions that, for example, can lead to other cases of disability or chronic illness within the family.
So could you share a particular number or statistic with us that gives us a kind of clearer insight into this phenomenon?
Individuals with a disability are the largest minority in the world. We have around 1 billion people worldwide, so around 15% of the global population live with some sort of disability. So, as I said, and you also mentioned this, these people tend to be marginalized and acknowledged, but this population is far from being negligible. Another sort of misconception is the idea that disability is associated with elderly people. But we should not make the mistake of conflate disability and aging. Because it is true that dynamics of aging and longevity in our societies have brought about a steep increase in the number of disabled older individuals. Consider that 46% of persons aged 60 and older have a disability. But today, there are also nearly 240 million of children with disabilities in the world. If we focus on Europe, the disability prevalence among children under age 16 is 4%, and 15 million of school-age children have been identified as having special educational needs.
So that's really a large number of children around the globe, and also specifically in Europe, where we see children with a disability. So that kind of raises the question: why do we know so little about the effect of children's disability on other family members, given that actually it's much more prevalent than we would think?
I would say for two main reasons. The first one is, again, because this population is considered as marginal. But my feeling is that if we start approaching disability not as an abnormal state, a special state, but as the result of social processes in which health conditions are in a constant dynamic relationship with the environment, we would see disability as more as a mainstream concern. So to understand disability and its wider social impact, we need to study disability in relation to daily life and multiple dimensions of the social environment. So basically, we should not simply find special solutions for special individuals, but we should aim at developing more universal, mainstream social inclusion strategies for conditions that, at the end of the day, can be experienced, even if temporarily or mildly, by everyone. The majority of individuals experiences in their life some sort of limitation or difficulty in functioning, at least for a short period of time. And this can be the result of an accident, illness, or aging. So basically, almost all families in the world have to care for a disabled member, at least for a while. The second reason is that there is lack of reliable, high-quality data. As I said, we don't even know how many disabled persons we have in the world in a precise way. We don't know exactly where these families with a disabled member are more fragile, and actually where they are stronger. There are a positive spillover effect. There is evidence that, for example, these families tend to have more often pro-social behaviors. So they, for example, are more likely to engage in volunteering activities or civil engagement activities. And we should know this, and actually we should value this kind of characteristics. But we don't have data to sort of measure the dimension and the magnitude of this phenomenon.
So beyond the kind of obvious cost for the family that you described when it comes to having to care for a person with a disability, are there also kind of hidden societal costs associated with this?
For sure, there are. Families with a disabled child, for example, may experience what I call a disability trap, which is similar to the poverty trap. It's a sort of spiraling mechanism that forces families with a disabled member, with a disabled child, in a situation of disadvantage because disability can cause negative affect, despair, and stress. And this translates into lack of proactive behavior, in lack of aspirations. They don't even want these families because they are not supported enough to exit a situation of disadvantage. I think other hidden societal costs derive from a lack of effective social inclusion strategies. An example I can provide is, for example, the schools education system. in Europe, there has been a sort of a shift from a system where disabled children used to go to special schools in many European countries to a situation where more and more disabled children have started to be included in mainstream schools. But this has not been supported by adequate investment. So, for example, there are not enough resources for special teachers who can support these disabled children in mainstream school. And this has led, for example, to higher dropout rate and, more in general, low well-being in classes for all the pupils. And this, of course, are important costs that we should try to reduce with appropriate investment.
So in your research, is there a particular person that has made a real impact on you while conducting your research?
I don't want to sound rhetorical, but I think that the person who has made a real impact on me and my research is definitely my son Vittorio. He has the reason and the inspiration of why I started to do research on these families. I think he teaches me every day that we can see the world from very unconventional perspective, allows me to discover new angles, new way of seeing things. He has been teaching me that disability is for sure a challenge, and he makes me aware of how much we still can do for him and for kids like him and for families like us in order to make lives easier. But I also think he has been teaching me that we can actually be much more resilient than what we think, and also we can be happy regardless of these big challenges we are facing. There is an interesting research that shows something that is called disability paradox. And basically, there is evidence that disabled people tend to show higher quality of life compared to non-disabled individuals. A reason could be that these people have lower expectations. So in a way, they are more easily happy. And in a way, this could be a mechanism that can apply also to family members when in the family there is a disabled person.
So, it's very clear that, fascinating what you say is about how we could all learn from people and family members that deal with disability. And also maybe that's an important aspect of kind of putting more of a spotlight on this. So you talked already a little bit about how public policy and how governments could do more. Do you think that governments or public institutions in general are aware of the magnitude of this problem?
I would say that considering that we are unable to quantify the phenomenon in the first place, institutions are not fully aware of the magnitude of this issue. Also because, as you said, the attention tends to be on the disabled individuals only and not on the families. I think we lack a sort of an approach that takes into account the wider impact of disability. We really have to take into account that the disability of a family member affects. Let's talk about disability of a child affects parents, but also siblings and grandparents. And we need to understand that the disability of a child impacts every single aspect of the other family member's life. This, for example, can be employment, educational choice, health, leisure time, life course trajectories.
So what do you think would be or maybe you could give an example of a particular type of policy that you think might help families to balance the weight of caring for a child with a sickness or disability?
I think that most of the existing policies tend to support these families from a financial point of view, and of course this is crucial. But I think there is one other resource that is very scarce for these families, but that is too often neglected, and this is time. I think we can help these families balancing the weight of caring for a child and having a satisfactory life by, for example, investing in rehab center, institution and centers that can basically take care of disabled children during the day after school, sports centers that can also favor integration of these disabled children with the other children. And this, I think, would have a beneficial effect for the other family members because they can have more time, of course, not only to go to work, but also more leisure time. And this could have, of course, a positive effect in terms of well-being for the other family members.
So in closing, Bocconi University's motto is knowledge that matters. So how do you think your research matters?
I hope my research will be able to make the life of families like mine easier and happier. Understanding and showing risk and protective factors for the well-being of each family member facing the disability of another member would be of great interest to public health authorities that, for example, can devote resources to mitigate negative effects of disability of an individual on the other family member's health, for example. The research I'm carrying out aims to uncover family unmet needs, needs that we don't know yet. And I think that is crucial to implement and improve effective family-centered care systems. What are these systems? These systems have become the dominant care model in Europe, especially for the pediatric population. And basically they acknowledge the centrality of the families as crucial actors in meeting the care needs of disabled children. So basically they aim at supporting the family role and the well-being of the family as an essential part of the children's care. But these systems often are only partially implemented. So this kind of research can very much help implementing in a more effective way this kind of family-centered care systems.
Thank you, Nicoletta, so much for your time. Thank you all for listening. This was Think Diverse, a podcast on diversity and inclusion from Bocconi University Milan. To be notified about new episodes, subscribe to Think Diverse on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Spreaker.